Okay, it's Friday, October 7th, and this is an end of the day and end of the week SPY recap. You can see here today we had a big red day to the downside. We gapped lower and moved lower for most of the session, closed near the lows of the day. And as mentioned in earlier videos, we thought today, Friday, would give a good indication of what's developing next, and I think that has become clearer now. First of all, just this day by itself, even if you didn't know anything about continuity in multiple time frames, this is the daily chart, the weekly, the monthly chart, you would just see a day, that moved below the midpoint of the prior day. The first bar, 15-minute bar, moved below the pre-market range and had follow through. So, even on its own, it's just a typical day. You could see where we moved lower to start and paused a little bit, had one pullback, and then a secondary move to the downside, and it ended up kind of continuing lower all day long. I discussed on earlier videos how I bought puts here at the yellow line aggressively to start. There was a secondary sell right here, so those were the two obvious trades of the day, and they were pretty clear in terms of high probability too, because we were discussing how we were inside of a range, 3 days of consolidation that had had potential for a powerful breakout. And once we were gapping lower after some economic news where the pre-market range bottom was down near these blue lines, you pretty much knew you were breaking out to the downside of that area. Now, how far it was going to go, the question would be, would you fail immediately within this gap, which was expected to be filled? You just ended up filling that on the gap down. Or if not, then, you had a lot of targets below. And it turns out right out of the gates, if we would have paused here and head up, you might have, not been sure. Maybe you had to wait for an inside bar and then a break lower. But this first bar was pretty strong, breaking right out of there. So it showed you we weren't going to be holding there and then, moving back to the upside. And what that meant, if you look at the weekly chart, what's interesting, if you go back to yesterday's video, you'll see this was a nice green bar as of yesterday. And it was, pretty strongly green. And if we would have held this area a little bit, and price action would have either held or moved up a little bit, this would have been a strong green bar after 4 days and possibly had targets much higher. But once everything unfolded, gapping down and then having that strong, push to the start, the scenario unfolded that was always... I wouldn't even say in the back of my mind, it was in the front of my mind, quite frankly, that you have a monthly chart here that's big red last month, which should follow through lower at some point, and we were only at the midpoint on that first little rally a few days in October. We were just near the midpoint, so it looks like, that's a good time where if you're going to picture this bar being red by the end of the month, that could be an area where you'd pause and eventually head lower. Now, we might head lower, and who knows where the month's going to end up. We'll work on that, as we get there. For a second today, this monthly bar turned red. It got below the open, and we closed just barely, a little green still for the month. What this means at the moment, by the way, is nothing in terms of like a shooter bar. To me, this is still, we have a 2 down month from last month. We're looking for 2 down continuation. There's no obvious signal that we're going to have to go there. If we end up an inside month, let's say, and we never break the high or low of this month, then next month, wherever we break, I'd have a target either to the high or to the low. But for now, this is just a 2 down continuation possibly forming. When we broke below this 2 down bar here, we had targets down there. So as it was forming, I was always having a target down here. Here at this point, it's just an inside bar. What's a little more clear, though, on the weekly chart, and I discussed this, is how if we were going to have a big breakdown, you could picture how that big green bar on the weekly chart, for 4 days, it looked good, but on the final day, we end up with a big shooter bar. So this bar definitely, to me, looks like you're going to follow through lower. And once you follow through lower from the shooter bar, you get a 2 down week. That then projects to the low of that week. And all of a sudden, that then, kind of confirms the 2 down continuation that we're looking for on the monthly chart. So the shooter bar is really, and I think, if you want to think about it, like as the market was heading down and as the session was getting more and more, towards the afternoon and the close, everyone knew or whatever that this bar is likely going to close as a shooter bar, and then which means likely a little bit of continuation lower next week. And if we get continuation lower, then we're targeting those lows again. So that's why I don't think you're going to be buying, as the market was going down, the odds were not strong you were going to see any kind of big rally, because everyone saw this week was going to be closing this way and have likely follow through into next week. But anyway, we'll see what happens. So it's a pretty clear picture now. I think that this red bar, just on its own, a daily bar, you expect it to go lower. You have a shooter bar on the weekly chart, you're expecting that to go lower. We have a monthly chart that once all that's triggered, you're expecting it to at least take out the lows of that bar. You have this next target down below. I can get into that. We haven't reached that target yet. That goes back to, it's actually, this bar is a daily bar. And if we get below, that bar, on the monthly chart, we have a big target down below there, but I'll get into that, another time. For now, let's just see. And finally, I guess the last thing, if we really expand the 15-minute chart out, I was always showing, even though I was talking about possibly filling this gap, between the low of this bar and the high of this bar, we were close to getting there. And if this 3-day consolidation would have went to the upside, I had this target up there. Another thing that was also mentioned was that on this little move up here on Wednesday, we did take out that final target here on the daily chart. So it was always possible, if you look at this, zooming out the 15-minute chart and the way broadening actions work in these markets, that we did broaden out to the upside here and we reached that little target, and then we were consolidating here for 3 days. So once you saw the breakdown, all of a sudden you're past the midpoint heading lower, and this whole broadening, action, which was broadening very narrow here, it broadened to the upside. Well, now it has bigger broadening, overall, and that's why, again, we're very likely going to take out that low. And if you want to extend this line, you can almost project down to this, target heading up. So we'll get into that next week, but that's what seems to be developing. And it was all, even though, you might have thought you still want to fill this gap all the way to the top there, once this consolidation broke to the downside, this whole scenario of broadening out, reaching its target, and then starting back down was always possible. And again, it was very clear given the strength of the move to the downside to open up. So that's where we stand to end the week. We'll see what it opens next week, but we got to be biased to the downside. And if you bought puts or anything, and if you're more of a swing trader, you could be holding on with, I think, some comfort that you're heading there, but you never know. And day trading wise, again, 2 very clear signals today to sell. And, like I think I was talking about all week, I thought Friday, given all these possibilities, I thought this day would really clarify a lot of what's happened next. And it seems to be that, we're heading lower at the moment, and we'll go from there. So, again, big thing, weekly chart, shooter bar, that's kind of the one I'm focusing on that should test lower and set off a little bit of a chain reaction to, turn the monthly chart finally red to follow through there on the downside. So let's see what happens on Monday.